Welcome to Corporate in the Middle, where we talk about the reality of product and project management with people who are in the trenches. I'm your host, Johnny Rivera, working in the industry for about 20 years in tech, in and around all sorts of product and product management. I'm joined by Kyle Johnson. Kyle,
Pleasure.
how are you?
In the trenches, living
In
the
the
dream.
trenches, actively. Also actively in the trenches is our guest, Jessamy Carruthers, which I'm very happy to have on with us. How are you, Jessamy?
I am doing great. Thanks for having
That's,
me.
that's awesome. So, full disclosure, we have all worked together. So, Jessamy and I worked for Kyle for a firm, working in his product team. And so, unfortunately, we have all gone our own separate ways. But what has really come out of this is that we're able to have a good professional conversations over the last few years, even though we've been separated. And so the reason why we're having Jessamy on today is because she had just newly acquired her PMP in the 7th edition. And congratulations. Yes, applause, applause, applause. And I thought it would be interesting to have a conversation about how she's using that. What was it like before she was using it? You know, things that she had learned. And we have some very interesting questions to talk about. So why don't we just jump right in? So, I'm curious. Your version of the PMBOK that you got your PMP on was the 7th edition. And then Kyle, we were talking about before this, Kyle has got his PMP in a different edition, which was the 5th edition. So what I wanted to ask you about is, are you aware of the differences between the several editions? Did you do any studying before? How are you utilizing this edition in your current work today?
My understanding is that one of the main differences in PMBOK 7 is a heavy emphasis on Agile, and that it's even more so in PMBOK 8, which I haven't looked at yet. Kyle, I don't know if that sounds accurate to you.
I mean, I'm sure it does. I was chatting with Johnny. I haven't picked up the PMBOK in 12 years. Uh, but I mean, contrasted to version 5, which is what I had when I got my PMP, there was very little focus on agility. It was kind of mentioned as a footnote. Hey, there's this agile thing going on. Adapt. Like that was pretty much all there was involved.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so my exam was like half Agile, and there's a lot of emphasis on both Agile and hybrid ways of working, and it got pretty detailed on different Agile frameworks and how project management processes fit into them. It was really interesting.
So, like, we were working as product owners under a Scrum framework with Kyle. So, I would think that that would have given you an advantage with the information and taking that test, right? So, like, there's a lot of
Yeah,
familiar
for
things
sure.
going on. Yeah, and so are you seeing that as part of the PMBOK, like where that move to agility, especially in tech, you're still working with software teams. Does the merging of the two PMBOKs, kind of like project management framework and waterfall, and then this push to agility, has it really helped you in your current work?
So the employer I have right now is not doing a lot with Agile as far as actually executing work that way. However, I have definitely been able to bring the principles of minimum viable product and iterative approaches to complex problems to help my project teams, stay on task and execute, maybe get some of their testing done a little bit earlier. So it's definitely been helpful. And of course, just for passing the test, I already had so much familiarity with a lot of the concepts that I didn't have to study quite as hard for that part.
That's good because it was a daunting test from what I'm told.
It was intense.
I remember my test. There was a lot of focus on like calculating communication channels, earned value management, schedule
Yes.
performance index. Those still focuses now that there's a pivot to agile?
Yeah, they were a big part of the studying. I actually only got a few questions on the test that were related. Now, fortunately, with my math background, I didn't have to necessarily memorize the formulas because I was able to spend some time to understand the meaning of each one, and that would allow me to back into the formula when I needed to. So I didn't spend a ton of time like memorizing, and I'm glad I didn't because there really weren't a ton of questions on the test. It was more about things like making sure you understand whether a schedule performance index or a cost performance index under one or over one, like what does that actually mean? And then use that to make judgments about how you could then speed the project up based on whether you actually had budget or not, so I'd say that would be the advice I would give is to study those formulas from the perspective of what are they actually telling you and not so much as what is the math equation.
I think that's a great perspective. One thing that's for anyone listening who actually wants to take the PMP, there is significant variability from one test experience to the next.
Yeah.
They have
Yeah.
a huge bank of questions. Some will focus on like what I was talking about, earned value management, schedule, performance index, whatever. Some could just be focused on like tracking the critical path. Again, my test was 12 years ago, but
Yep.
there can be significant variability. My wife took her PMP probably like 4 years after I did, and her experience was completely different.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they also changed. They had changed the additions. I'm going through a kind of a refresher course, and the addition changes around how the sections of knowledge and portions. Like now, it's focused on that two-part kind of like principles versus practices. And then even though they have like similar things, like they have a stakeholder principle and they talk about the outsides of those, and then they have the practice on the inside. Like all of that is like even changed for those who are like Kyle who want to refresh. It's been a minute for sure. All right, do you want to ask your question, Kyle?
Yeah. So this is kind of a question I had when you moved into your current job. So I started as a project manager because that was product was not really a thing when I got out of college, and I got bored. Sorry, all you project managers out there. I got bored with project management very quickly. The distance from the customer, the distance from the product, the distance from engineering, I kind of felt like I was on an island by myself, and I didn't get to do any of the fun stuff. So I ultimately moved into product, which got me closer to many of those things. You, however, went from product to project, and I'm curious what motivated that transition.
No, that's a pretty interesting insight. Um, so we'll go back to my motivation for making the move. I really felt like as a product manager, my career was in a constant downward trajectory that I just couldn't stop. All of my fun and success as a product manager were when I had a lot of independence, a lot of control over my strategic planning. I was able to do the things that they train you to do, which is talk to customers and understand the market, make recommendations, and execute on them. But it seems like every time a company encounters choppy waters, they start by clawing all of the control back from product to executive leadership. And there would be more layers between me and the decision makers. I would not get information anymore. I would not be listened to. And I have a lot of experience, and I was continuing to grow and to learn and going backwards. Every year I was going backwards, no matter where I worked. And so then I started encountering this phenomenon at the same time, which is where the lack of a clear understanding in a lot of companies of what product actually is meant that extra duties start getting shoved on you. And I kept being treated as a workhorse, and I was given a lot of responsibilities that were maybe something that you would give a director, but I wasn't given the title or the pay. I mean, it's just a cheaper way to get somebody to get that work done without giving them authority or any recognition for it. At least that was how I was seeing things, and it was becoming honestly more blatantly said that way by the companies I worked for. So after my last experience of that, I was just completely burnt out, and I just no longer had any real faith that product was going to ever allow me to get back to that space where I was actually doing product and driving strategy and business value myself. So I started to think about what else can I do? And like Kyle, I started before product was really a thing. I did business analysis for a long time. I loved it, but I didn't really feel like business analysis was going to be the thing that gets me the seat at the table that I want to actually move the needle for companies. I also had done a lot of project management unofficially, and something I liked about project management is that it's a little more unambiguous, probably because of the longevity of the PMP. But I feel like in every company I've worked for that has had project managers, leadership seems to understand what a project manager is and what they do, and they have some respect for them, which I don't know that a lot of companies have a lot of respect for their product managers. And so it's also a very crucial part of getting things done. And honestly, I was getting a little irritated by the end because they tell you in product, project managers, they tell you they don't make good product people, right? Because they're tactical thinking, whereas product is strategic thinking. And I do agree with that to some degree. Kyle, you probably have been through that as well. Like it is a bit of a
Mhm.
stretch to move from more of a tactical, purely execution focused to more strategy, customer market oriented type of thing. So you get dinged for doing too much project management looking stuff. Like literally at my last engagement, um, I had someone report to my boss that I had recorded action items in a meeting, and that showed that I was a tactical thinker and not a strategic thinker, and they weren't interested in working with me anymore because of that. So, like you have to hide it kind of. And so I started to think, I'm good at project management. I'm constantly getting dinged for doing it, but it's desperately needed. I saw so many
Hmm.
projects fail at
Mhm.
companies I work for due to the company not realizing that you still need project management, even though you have product people. So, like, let's just be part of the solution here, Jessamy. So that's really my motivation. Product was going nowhere. I felt like this was worth a try. I was just going to say though, to Kyle's point about the isolation and the boredom. So I would say that I have kind of mixed product thinking with project thinking. And what made me attractive to my current employer in part was that I had so much experience with user experience, product launches, getting myself into the head space and the context of the people that I'm delivering for. And they were looking for a project manager that was not purely IT focused, but someone that was enterprise focused and would actually take the time to understand the needs of the end users of all of these complex healthcare projects. And so my user experience work that I did um, has really paid off by allowing me to really provide some satisfied people and some successful launches in spaces where launches are often very rocky because the other folks in the project team may not have as much experience with that type of thinking.
That is fascinating to hear because one of the things that I think is the most important as part, whether you're in product or project, is that human centered kind of stakeholder engagement. Like you have to be aware of your team, you got to be aware of the people that you're working for and the things that you're doing. And it's not just words on the page or numbers in a book, it's how do you connect with these people to make a better outcome, right? Like all that you said is just it resonates with me so much because you have to be adaptable, and there are times like when we work together in our situation, there were times where it required more project management. Like you received a set of action items or strategy that you need to execute on, and then you were challenged because there wasn't enough organization around it, or you were
Hmm.
challenged because you didn't understand your stakeholders well enough. So what you had to do is you had to go in there, you have to work with your stakeholders, you have to go in there, you have to work with your team. Maybe you do a lot of the scrum practices that we were geared to do, but also maybe you needed to organize and collaborate with other project managers and product managers, right, to be able to get your work
Yep.
done. So having that adaptability, I think, is like crucial. It shouldn't be
Mhm.
pigeonholed into one, nor should someone judge you by saying like that is a X activity, you shouldn't be doing that because that shows that like you're not looking at the entire picture is what you're supposed to do. So one of the things I was going to ask you about was like, how did you feel about your level of ownership, which you've addressed very succinctly there, where
Yeah.
in product you would think that you would have a lot more ownership, but it sounds like the way you are working through your projects is that you are taking ownership of the entire life cycle, everything that is around it, ensuring its success, which is like to me, I think it's exactly what you should be doing.
I have a lot more ownership now. I don't know how much of that is specific to the company I work for now, but I feel like leadership at this organization has a really good relationship with the PMO, the project management organization, and they have a lot of respect for what we do. And I have way more ownership and autonomy as a project manager towards the success of my projects than I ever did in product towards the success of my product lines.
How big is your organization now? Out of
It's a
curiosity.
health system that has five different hospitals and then a large number of clinics and specialty care facilities. I'm not sure the colleague count, but it's definitely in the thousands.
So that's interesting because I'm assuming it's a highly matrixed organization, right? You have a lot of teams you're working with, a lot of different people you're working with,
Oh,
and that's
yes, lots, very many.
yeah, and that's part of the reason why I reference it as corporate in the middle because there's a lot of people in that like middle space that you're in that we were all in
Yep.
that your ownership varies. And so it's good that leadership recognizes it. Now the interesting thing about this is that it's the PMO who recognizes your leadership and the ownership that you have. And I think that's a huge deal, right? We all say that we need leadership buy-in in order for this to proceed. As soon as you do not have that trust anymore, then things
Yep.
go off the rail, just as you explained.
I have a really great boss who has laid amazing groundwork with leadership at this system and has really, I think we've really established a great rapport and level of trust. And that's actually stepped up with adding me to the team since I bring a finance background and some, enterprise business wide experience. I've been able to step in and show value in some projects that are not IT focused at all. So we're kind of
Mm-hmm.
moving the next step towards really becoming an enterprise PMO. And it's been so healing to be part of a partnership like that. And I've actually had projects succeed, which I mean, I went years without successful projects due to
Yes.
corporate issues before. And projects are succeeding, they're moving along. This company is doing a massive transition in its health record system this year. I heard about it when I was interviewed, and I was like, yeah, it's going to take like the next 5 years because they were saying it was going to be delivered in 2027. Like, that's ridiculous. No, it's actually going to be delivered in 2027. They hired the people that are needed to get done, they devoted the resources to it. I've been with this company for a year, and the deadline for like their timeline for this has not slipped. It is wild. Like, so I'm working for a company that knows how to do some things right, and that's been very refreshing.
That's awesome.
So before we get too far afield, I wanna like jump back and address. So speaking of ownership and product management, for anyone potentially listening and looking for product management positions, if you are going to be successful and find a opportunity that fits what you want, you have to be comfortable in having those conversations in your interview, right? You need to understand what your empowerment is. You need to understand that groundwork that you talked about that's in place with your product or project management leadership to empower you, right? Be comfortable asking for examples. You need to be able to understand what you're going to be walking into so that you're not disappointed and you don't feel powerless or on an island after you enter that opportunity.
With the caveat that you can have those conversations, but things can change quickly, which is what happened to me.
Right. And so the second point I wanted to make, because we're talking about how the PMO and your project management leadership really trusts you to own your work, right? To take it to success and completion. That trust is an extremely tenuous foundation. In modern corporate America, leadership changes all the time. As a product manager, as a project manager, as any role that's working across departments where you have face time with a lot of leadership and a lot of ICs, you have to continue to build those relationships and never stop because all of the groundwork that you put in to impress your leaders, to show them that you are a hard worker, it disappears as soon as they're gone.
Yeah.
Layoffs are extremely common, especially in the tech sector now, right?
100%.
People, even if not layoffs, people are constantly looking to move between organizations because that's your easiest path to career advancement these days, right? Staying with a company just doesn't work for most people these days.
Yeah.
So understand that in this role, you will constantly have to build those relationships and rebuild those relationships and have an understanding of what your ownership is, and then it'll change on random Tuesday.
That's so
Yeah,
true.
I worked for a multinational corporation that was extremely matrixed and had layers and layers and departments all over. And the way that tech works in a lot of cases is they make a lot of like microservices, and these microservices all join together to make the whole machine run. And one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting was I built a set of relationships. I was able to get great rapport, understood my stakeholders and the teams we were working with. And they moved those teams off of those microservices because they were done. And then when like 8 months later, when I went to go back and say, hey, I need to like work on this thing that is, either needs to be changed or adapted, that team no longer was there because of layoffs. And also a new team came in with this and not fully understanding their responsibility with their own agenda and their own set of priorities. So when I went to go and lobby for these changes, I had to restart all of that again, to Kyle's point. We change constantly. That
Yep.
change, you have to be as adaptable as possible, for sure.
Yeah, it requires endless patience and determination, I think, no matter where you're at. And like you said, every day reinforcing those foundations.
Yeah. So, kind of along the same line, going from product to project or project to product, uh, I have found that I've been able to build those relationships and demonstrate my value to organizations by acting as a project manager, often when I'm not one, right? I'll have leadership come to me and say, Kyle, this needs to get done. What can you do to push it along? And I have skills, right, that I learned from project management, that I learned from PMI. Thank you. That allowed me to assess the situation, move quickly, and get the project to completion. So my question to you are, what core project management skills that do you leverage daily that you would recommend others in similar positions master, right? Whether or not they want to pursue a PMP, but what project management skills are translatable regardless of the position?
So I would say cross team collaboration. You spend so much time, like you mentioned, building all of these relationships across departments. And as a project manager, one of the biggest differences in my day-to-day life right now is that I don't have a single team that I work with all the time or two teams. I have a team for every project, and they're all different people and they're all different. So there is a lot of interesting learning in the PMP about how to effectively bring these groups of disparate people together across departments, across countries and cultures. I really loved learning about it. By the way, if anyone is looking at the PMP, definitely get PMI Study Hall. It was amazing. It touched even more deeply on some of these topics than my classes did. So that 100%. And then I also learned a lot of really good strategies for just general project communication that I think absolutely apply to the product world as well, because you never want your boss, your leader, your sponsor, anyone to feel like they're being left in the dark. And I felt like that was something I had worked on pretty hard, but I learned even more about it going through the PMP. You just spend so much of your time communicating, and so much of your traction in an organization is related to your ability to bring people together, to get a consensus, to get them to get along, to get to a shared understanding. And so I would absolutely say those skills. And maybe just as a bonus, I mentioned my business analysis background. This isn't really a PMBOK thing at all, but the ability to visualize processes, architectures, swim lane diagrams, things like that. take a look at your the business analysis body of knowledge and, brush up your visual diagramming skills. Leverage AI to help you. Absolutely useful to
I
me
want
and
to
makes me stand apart.
I want to echo that. I'm also a business analyst in another life. Whether you're a business analyst, systems analyst, product manager, project manager, product owner, I'm trying to think of other related fields. Regardless of that position, if you're working in software development, if you do not know how your product works, you will not be successful. You walk in, it's going to be extremely confusing. You need to talk to your business. You need to understand how the business understands the product because they often don't. You have to understand engineering and you have to understand how engineering understands the business because they often don't. And in all those positions I listed, you are often the connective tissue. To Jessamy's point, bringing all these groups of people together and being able to communicate. I think I would agree the biggest or the most important skill that PMBOK teaches or PMI teaches or any project management course is going to teach you is communication. That's why on the test they teach you how to calculate communication channels for a project because that is probably the most critical skill anyone in our roles or similar needs to learn to be successful.
There's a huge emphasis in the seventh edition around stakeholder management, team
Yep,
leadership, and stewardship. So those things are like huge because even though you may have the technical acumen, not being able to lead people to the outcomes that you want them to do will hamper your success, right? So it doesn't matter if you have great systems thinking or technical knowledge or even like intense product knowledge like of the industry. If you cannot influence people, you cannot be as successful as you possibly can. And there's three of the,
100%.
what is it, 12, I believe, principles are based around those types of things. I've always stated that I think that the biggest hurdle for people is people, right? Like we have a hard time because we have our own agendas, we have our own lived experiences, and that's hard to translate when you're talking to somebody, especially in trying to get a job in an interview because they want to ensure that you have the technical acumen to be able to proceed. But really, it's your ability to communicate, your ability to lead, influence, help people to understand why you want to get to the outcomes that you want. That will ensure that you'll have success.
100%.
We're going to bring things full circle here. Okay, now that you've got your PMP, and in order to get your PMP, you presumably have a lot of project management practice hours, right?
Yep.
So you've been doing it for a while. Um, do you have a new perspective and I'm going to stress how projects should be run, whether agile delivery frameworks that you've used in the past, so Kanban, Scrum, uh, whether or not they were destined to fail?
Sure. Yeah, that's a really good question. I gave this one a little bit of thought earlier today because I thought that was pretty interesting. And I have seen so many projects succeed and so many projects fail, and I've always been absolutely fascinated by the differences between them. So I would say that unfortunately, a lot of the things that allow a project to succeed are potentially out of the hands of the project manager because a lot of the projects that I have seen fail have not necessarily failed due to poor project management. Obviously, that can happen, right? But a lot of the projects that I have seen fail personally are more related to the company not having a firm strategy, not having a set of goals that they have decided on, making drastic changes repeatedly so that no project that takes more than a couple quarters to execute could possibly succeed because the company is changing their strategy so frequently. So I think a solid corporate strategy that lasts at least 9 months, with clear goals that's communicated is kind of a requirement for any project that has much meat to it to succeed. I would also say that you have to have a pretty strong relationship between leadership and the people that are executing the project, because if that trust doesn't go both ways, then oftentimes you end up fulfilling leadership directives that you know aren't going to succeed, but you have no way to speak back and be heard. It's horrible to work on a project that you know is going to fail, and not be able to stop that. And I've had that happen too many times in my career. So you've got to have that two-way trust. And then I think a third one is maybe a little more minor, but also important. You should not be incepting projects unless the people that are required to execute them are actually available to work on the project. Now, that's probably more of a project management, not necessarily a software thing, because with software, you know whether the team is available or not. But that's not always the case.
Yeah,
Sometimes
I
there's
was
a
gonna say.
critical resource that you need that's not on your team. Now, this kind of leads into our Agile question, because if you're running Scrum, at least every resource you need should be on the team, at least to a reasonable degree. That isn't always the case, though. You know, you're sharing QA, you're sharing
Yeah,
UX.
in an organization where it's highly matrixed, and then on top of that, you have a lot of teams working on it, right? That's where you run into the problem.
Hmm.
If you can contain it to your one team, then your probability of success is dramatically higher than if it was has multi dependencies, and again, like you're sharing resources, like you're talking about.
Yeah, 100%.
I've always felt like in my experience with working with development and software, I love working in that space, but it does not scale very well. Like software is eating the world, and it's in Bank of America, and it's in the little startup that's running its, whatever software package it's doing. But as you scale, it gets worse and worse around the control factor, right? Exactly what you're saying. If you do not set up your people for success, like, hey, we want to execute on the strategy, but those people are not available because we told them a priority last week, and well, you got to do both at the same time. Obviously, that's not going to work, right? So I think
Yep.
your point is very, very well taken in the sense that like you need to have a good, consistent strategy from leadership and that trust in order for you to execute on it.
And really, trust when it comes to Agile, that's another major issue. Like I was talking about trust from the perspective of project management and the PMO, but one of the reasons that I see Agile often fail is that businesses cannot afford to allow their teams, they can't trust their teams to self-organize, just like they can't
Hmm.
trust their product people to actually be product people. So what I have often seen happen is companies start out with a lot of trust. Some teams live up to that and succeed. Other teams don't. And instead of trying to build an environment where all of their teams can live up to it, the easier option, I think, from leadership is just to clamp down. And so that might prevent the underperforming teams from doing horrible things, but it also then prevents your teams that are excelling from continuing to excel because you force them into a box that prevents them from doing that, which is another thing that can be very frustrating. So when I have seen Agile be very successful, it has been when teams are really allowed to self-organize but are also held accountable. And that accountability piece often fails. Like the trust has to go both ways, right? Like the company needs to trust the teams to self-organize, but they also need to hold the teams accountable to certain standards, test-driven development, what percentage needs to be covered. Are your projects being QA'd? Are they going through appropriate paths for launch? Like there has to be some accountability that flows back. Some of those things are not easy to put in place. It's a lot easier, I think, for companies to tighten the screws on control over their teams, and that can prevent success. Agile has to be a top-down thing with leadership bought in, right? Oftentimes, corporate leadership would probably say that they are bought in, and I think they might believe that they are, but they may not really be willing to make all the changes they need to actually make Agile successful. And I think a lot of times that comes down to the accountability piece because Agile frameworks, in my mind, require a lot of accountability to succeed. If you're going to run Scrum, you need to hold your teams to at least making the good faith effort to complete their stories in a sprint. If your teams are going to be running Kanban, they should be held to work in progress limits. They should be held to taking stories top down, that sort of thing. they should be held to certain quality standards, test-driven development standards, but also, allowed to innovate in there. What I often see is that there's a level of buy-in to Agile, but not necessarily the culture shift that is really
Hmm.
required to make it successful. I think that there is definitely some level of rule bending allowed, right? But you need to start perhaps
Adaptability.
with some more rules in place until you've seen it succeed. And I often don't see that happen. On the other side, though, sometimes I see companies go so all in with Agile that, for instance, they throw project management out the window. They don't feel like it's required.
Yes. Yes.
Or um, I think that sometimes like something that I learned a lot about through the PMI study is the feasibility of hybrid projects where parts are agile and parts are not. And
Yes.
I think that is very realistic. Talking about when the rubber meets the road, right? Like I
Hmm.
am a huge Scrum fangirl. I love Scrum. I love Kanban. I think agile principles are truly valuable and they have allowed me to have a lot of successes. But I also think that it can become kind of a religion. And I think that there's often situations where waterfall is really the only appropriate approach for parts of the project, and that is okay. And if that works for you, for your project, you should not feel guilty about your impurity.
Yeah, there's a lot of ambiguity, especially in software development. So coming from a manufacturing
Yes.
background, I'll give you an example. I worked for a company that made paper, like newsprint paper, right? And so they're a continuous manufacturing operation. You put a raw material in, that you process that raw material, and then you net out a final, finished good, right? And then there's going to be some efficiencies there. You're going to utilize 91% of your raw materials, and it's something you can calculate and something you can cost account against. In software, you can't have that, especially when you're working from a greenfield space or from a space where you need to build onto something that requires some more feedback, right? And so that
Hmm.
ambiguity is very difficult for leadership. They want to see that exact, I have so many story points per team. That means I can produce X amount of features, which means I can start to produce Y amount of revenue. And that's
Yep.
not the case in software. And that's where that trust tends to break down when leadership doesn't give teams the ability to self organize because they don't trust them to be able to hit the marks that they say they're going to hit. So relying on outcomes, OKRs, things like that, there are ways to measure these sort of things, but that trust has to come from leadership when they're relying on very tangible, specific metrics instead of using the metrics that you use to produce the outcomes they want. So I totally
And in
understand that.
fairness to them, like they are putting a lot of money into efforts that may or may not succeed. How do they know whether things are clipping along like they should be? Like you said,
Yeah.
if it's a greenfield situation, there just isn't a clear way to predict how
That's right.
long it's going to take to do something. And I totally understand why that is frustrating to leadership and why that is hard and why that makes it really hard to trust teams, especially, like you said, in a large scale organization where careful observation of every team is not necessarily a thing that you can do.
Yeah, you can't manage it at scale. You can't have the amount of like inspect and adapt, on a team like you're saying that you can't put that same kind of energy into a large scale organization.
Software companies haven't had, because of the exact thing that you talked about, the lack of predictability, the lack of a tangible outcome, software companies that I've been involved with tend to have less maturity when it comes to things like metrics and measurement and strategic goal setting even than
Hmm.
companies that are have more tangible items or like healthcare.
Yeah. It's funny how we've kind of circled the funnel a little bit to the point here where, trust and engagement is very, very important, but the externalities create a situation where it makes it very difficult. We mentioned earlier about like the turnover of how people move through companies. Like in order to succeed as an individual, you got to move on to organizations. In order for an organization to feel like they're in control, they have to continually turn over people. If you're a publicly traded company, you're beholden to shareholders. If you are private equity backed, you have a board that you're subject to, and that strategy can change very quickly, which prevents a lot of successful factors, right? And so, like, we're stuck in this middle where we want to be able to gain that trust as individuals with our leadership. We want to be able to produce good outcomes, but all these externalities are making it very difficult for us. It's kind of interesting that we've gotten essentially to that point. The PMBOK talks a lot about adaptability, right? And your ability to move within these circles in ways that are going to make you successful. I think that's incredibly valuable. I would never be such a devout agilist where I would say never use waterfall, right? Like, of course we're going to have to use waterfall. I would never tell somebody, oh no, we're not doing any kind of project management activity. What's wrong with you? What are your story points, right? You've got to be able to adapt to your team. You've got to be able to adapt to your project. You've got to adapt to your product. And if it requires you to be more hands-on in terms of like that scheduling and coordination, this is where it's really good to have this kind of information. If it requires you to be more engaged with your stakeholders to understand the product better so that you can make a better product and a better outcome, then you do that, from that kind of like agilist side. Your perspective is very interesting to me because you came from those two worlds and now you're settling in and you're taking that body of knowledge and you're using it to make you as successful and your company successful. So it's really cool to see that.
It's been neat. It's been a neat experience for sure. And I will say that honestly, moving from product management to project management has been maybe a smaller leap than moving from software to not software.
Hmm.
I think that's the bigger change for me because
Yes.
the software industry, like you said, high turnover, a lot of uncertainty right now, a lot of uncertainty all the time. I think a lot of companies that are, less mature in some ways as far as just running themselves as a business. Um, Healthcare is very different in some ways. Well, first off, I'm not doing a lot of software related stuff right now. I mean, everything I do has some software element, but I am getting to be hands-on with equipment and facilities, and I have like a trunk full of blueprints right now, and I'm, mapping out routes for robots. That makes things different. People have a different perspective. Folks seem to stay, and I mean, again, this is my first healthcare job. I don't have like a huge map of the industry, but I see different, people tend to have been there a long time. Like one thing that I actually kind of struggled with when I took this job is that they have a cap on what you can earn based on how long you've been with the company. And since I had not been there more than 20 years, I had to take quite a pay cut to leave. And like, I mean, so they're talking about a lot of longevity with this company. It is not unusual for people to have been with the company I'm at for 30 years, 40 years. There's not a lot of turnover. I am a weirdo coming in, having changed jobs midstream. There's also a lot of people that have a lot of higher education.
Mm.
I work with a lot of people with doctorates, and they're not just the doctors. Most people have their MBAs. Like, it's a very different world. And I think that has a lot of impact on how I'm able to be successful. It's easier to measure things. It's easier to measure the impact of things. I know where my users are. I can go to them in person, like what's not necessarily the case in software. So I do think some of the transition that I'm liking isn't so much, some of it's being out of product management, but some of it is just being out of software.
Mm.
I can echo that. When I moved cross country 8 years ago, I was leaving an engineering company. Software was a part of it, but it was only a piece of it. We had hardware manufacturing, we had what is it, defense supply manufacturing as well. So in that company, historical knowledge was valued a lot more than what I see it valued in software development.
Oh yeah.
I watch people who have been, principal engineers for 10, 15 years cut in layoffs just as easily as someone who's been there for 6 months, right? I
Yeah,
I I,
they don't
I think
value that. Software
yeah,
companies
human
don't value
resource
that the
is not
same.
nearly valued as much
It's
in
very
software
indiscriminate.
development as I've seen. Yeah.
The time has passed to have a career in a company care about that career. Like that's the unfortunate reality that we live in.
Yeah.
And, software is different, in terms of like manufacturing. When we produced a durable good in, especially in the United States, right? Like you would produce that good, you would have some efficiencies around that, and then you would sell that finished good, right? And that finished good would be sold and it'd be gone. And then in order for a company to make money again, you would have to then repeat that process. With software, it's interesting. We're in a subscription based model now, right? Especially now, where you
Hmm.
can produce a piece of software and basically it's going to make money in perpetuity as long as people are willing to consume it. And then you have to scale it, of course. In software, it's really interesting because there's a lot of internal tooling that has to be done, and there's a lot of external tooling that has to be done, and all of these things, and everyone contributes to it. But ultimately, when it's out there, right?
Yeah.
And it still makes money, and I think that's kind of the thing that really affects us as people working on these products is we want to continue to make them better, but there could be choices that companies make that they're like, nah, we don't need to do that, or nah, we don't need to
Yes.
work on any internal tooling to make that better, or the microservice is running and it's fine, and it does that sort of thing. And so I think we're trapped in this kind of situation where, companies can just trash months and months and months and months of work with little to no decision and just be like, yeah, that's not worth it right now, we're going to move on. There's no way you would spend months
Yep.
and months of physical work on a durable good only to throw it away. That's not something that people would invest in. I worked at
Point.
a product where we spent like 8 months getting something ready, and then 2 weeks before launch, we were all laid off. And they were like, "Yeah, no, that's okay. We don't need that anymore." And you're like, "Wow, I think we spent like probably 3,000 person hours, maybe 4,000 person hours on this thing," and they were like, "Yeah, no, we're all right, thanks." And I was like,
The
"Wow, there's
waste is
no way."
shocking. The waste
Yeah,
is shocking.
it's unbelievable, but it's mainly because they can get away with it. The company we were at, they still have a product that people buy. Not very many at this point, I guess, but like people still buy it, which means that they can stay in business. There's no way we could do that in a manufacturing situation.
To be fair, though, I think that is solid as a general rule, but I have seen exactly the situation you described happen. Months of work on a physical product, and then the decision comes in. It's generally because of changing market conditions, or competitive challenges that you see in the market that this happens. But I have seen it happen, and it was painful
Yeah,
to watch happen
yeah,
because I was literally there as a project manager, in the board meeting as we were having this discussion, and I had to watch all of these individuals say,
Mm,
make the decision to kill the
yeah.
project, and it was tough to see. But yes, it does happen less frequently. And I'm going to have to take this as my departure. Thank you, Johnny, for having me. Jessamy, it's always great catching up. You
yeah.
guys have a great
Absolutely.
evening.
A lot of.
Thanks.
Thank you, Jessamy. It was amazing.
It was a blast. I really enjoyed it. I love thinking about these things. I love getting to see you guys again, and so I'm always happy to catch up.
At least for me, I feel like I'm in a little bit of a vacuum, right? If we get together and we network and we do stuff on the outside, I feel like people are always putting like kind of like the best face forward, or they're just looking to complain a lot. I really just want to understand, like, okay, you're in a position. I know you. You're smart as a whip. Let me see what you're thinking about, especially taking on new opportunities. Like the PMP is different for us. Like you
It
said, we were in
is very
product for
different.
yeah, we were in product for so long. So what were those kind of comparisons? When we talk to our other coworkers and like people we know, it's really interesting to talk about like what they're thinking about, what is their concerns. You guys are in different parts of the country, so we're seeing different things regionally. I think it's
Yeah.
very fascinating.
Yeah, I am excited to hear your other episodes. And yeah, I'm not angling for another position. I'm not grouchy, so I'm ready to just have a philosophical conversation about what does work look like in 2026.
Well, you know what? You were awesome. So maybe we'll bring you on and start grilling some other people.
For sure, anytime.
All right. Have a
All
good
right,
one.
have great. Bye bye.
All right, well, that was our episode. I want to thank Kyle for hosting with me. It was a really interesting discussion. Thanks, Jessamy, for talking to us about your experiences and your transition from product to project. I think it was super interesting, and I think that it's super insightful as well. I really hope that you guys can join us next time. Have a good one.